Okay, I'm recording for posterity right now, so. Hi, Meredith.
Hi.
We don't see you yet, but we hear you. Hey.
I'm literally in a school. I'm sorry. Come on, guys. Come on.
Oh, wow. Oh no, I'm getting seasick as we're doing this here. This is. Hello. Don't you love technology? Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start. And as people log in, they will interrupt us, and that's okay. So first, I want to get some feedback. I know that some of you have gone ahead and done the first lab. I have not looked at that, and I just want to get a little. I want to hear from each one of you. So go ahead and turn your mics on. I just want to hear about how it went with the reach system. Okay, so why don't we start with Ashley St. Peter? Why don't you tell me how that, did you end up getting that?
Yep, I did get it. I think I got it on Friday.
Okay.
And yeah, it was pretty straightforward. I didn't have an issue with any of it. The software downloaded quickly and I was able to record like 3 of audio and 3 of the light. And yeah, it's pretty easy. I didn't have any issues with it.
Yep. So you were able to line up those red lines and do all that stuff and get the measures and.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. There was the third mark for each one, like the hearing and the audio. That was the one I had the farthest, like the longest.
So consistently that third time.
And yeah, it was. All right. Yeah, it was 400 milliseconds, and that was.
Holy cow! You're not even myelinated.
I don't even know what was happening there, but it was my true reaction. And then all the other ones were like around 190 to like 215. So I don't know what was happening, but it was always at the third mark. I don't know if I was preparing too much or.
Did the third one come in a little early?
There were some that were quicker than others. Yeah. So I don't know if I was just anticipating the next beep to try and get it quickly. And I don't know.
Because there's an adaptive part of our mind, the way we perceive time and how we, it's actually pretty remarkable how we try to make them equal.
Yeah.
Well, it's really hard for us to keep count sometimes because we're trying to keep it equal. It might not be equal, you know, our sense of, once we go 1, 2, 3, 4, we can keep it pretty equal, but if we're off, it's really hard to make an adjustment.
Yeah.
You might have experienced a little of that, you know, just kind of that one that came in and you're expecting them to, they were all random.
Yeah.
But the others, but the others were a little closer at least, you know, so that was cool. So, okay, Jaden, how did it go for you for the?
It took a while for the software to download. Like I had a hard time, but once I like figured it out, it was good.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Now, you got it off the little USB, right? It just took a long time to.
So I didn't realize that, like, since I have the MacBook, you have to get like the extension to plug it into the side of the computer because we don't have a USB port anymore.
Oh, you have a brand new.
Yeah, like
Yeah, no USB on that anymore.
Yeah, so I had to go get one of the pieces, like the adapter piece, so it would work, but
I burdened you with expense.
it's okay.
Bill the college. They'll be all okay.
It was better than paying for the actual equipment itself. So
True.
yeah.
Yeah. How did it go for you, Jordan?
It went good. It went smooth. It downloaded quicker and didn't have any issues.
Yep.
So
Very cool. And Meredith, have you received your reach yet?
Yeah, it wouldn't work on my computer. I had to upload it, and I took it to school and got to update my laptop. So now it should work when I get home. But
Okay, all right. Just have a faster connection at work or something like that.
yeah, because I have really horrible internet because I live like in the middle of the woods. So
Yeah. Oh, stop living in the middle of the woods.
I know.
Time for a new house.
Yeah,
All Jaden had to do was get an adapter. You have to get a whole new house.
I know. It's gonna be rough.
So, in anticipation of this, I'm glad it all worked out because the next lab, I'm gonna ask you
All right.
to do it again, except that this is out of sequence here. I'm talking about the lab that I'm going to be giving you folks for this week is going to be to redo that experiment. If possible, you're going to keep your data on your visual reaction time. And if possible, and I know some of you will not be able to do that, to find a person under the age of 3 and have them do the visual reaction time. Now, if it's going to be, this is obviously family, it's people that you feel comfortable with being in the presence of and stuff like this. So this is one of those labs I'm not going to require, but what we're trying to take a look at is the development. I'll be talking today about the development of the nervous system, and that the nervous system of a pre-3-year-old is slower than the nervous system of an adult. And we should be able to see that in a difference in reaction time. So if you have access to a person that's below age 3, that would be very good. Or if you can simply act that way. No, I'm kidding. Just act below 3. Just go to Silver Street Tavern and wait till Friday night. You can find lots of 3-year-olds. Okay, so I'm going to get into that in a little bit. So does anybody have any questions right now about things that are going on and whatnot? Give me like a thumbs up, because you're like this big on my screen. So give me a thumbs up if everything's okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start looking through chapter 5 in the course book here. And I will come back to this part in a little bit, but by way of lecture, and I'm not going to be doing too much of this, is I'm going to be just kind of covering kind of what's in the course book and sort of expect you to read that on your own, obviously. And so just cover a little bit here. We look into the development of the nervous system. Where does this all come from? And we really see some amazing structural components to that. And I put a link here in the course book to Wikipedia, which I know that that's not an academic source, but it is such a rich chunk of information in there. It's actually really cool. So just kind of a quick way to get some factoids about the development of the nervous system, what happens in utero, what happens, and the nervous system is almost the first thing that develops. Once you have a blastocyte, I don't know if you remember that from bio, if you're taking bio. Is anybody taking bio general biology? Anybody?
I'm taking it right now.
Okay. So when you're looking at the if you're looking at human anatomy and you're looking at the developing embryo, after fertilization, one of the first structures that we recognize is what's called a blastocyte, which is a hollow sphere of the kind of primary stem cells that are eventually going to turn into the fetus. And that blastocyte has an area that is already designated at the blastocyte level. It's already starting to differentiate itself into what will become the neural plate, which is going to be the growing place. It's kind of like where the brain stem meets the brain. That's a plate, and you're going to get basically growth in both directions. You're going to have growth that goes down the spinal cord and growth that evolves into the brain. And so right from the get-go. So I think some of you have taken developmental psych, and in developmental psych, we identify a concept called teratogens. And teratogens are any sort of anything that can interfere with the development of a fetus or embryo in this case, sorry. Anything that can interfere with that. So it can be stress or it can be heroin. It doesn't have to be inside or outside the body. It can be anything that interferes with that. And when we look at there's a chart that I include in my developmental psych class that has all the critical periods. Like if you're exposed to a teratogen during a certain period of time, when that happens matters, because there are certain periods of time in which certain things are developing, and those are the things that are going to be affected. And the nervous system is from day one to birth. Teratogens can affect there. What that reflects is the danger of teratogens for one, but the fact that the nervous system is developed is, it's the number one thing that's getting developed completely through in utero. And it doesn't even stop then. It keeps on developing after we're born. So in terms of going from an egg all the way to the embryo, to the fetus, to the birth, the nervous system is developing. And what I'll share with you is actually, let me see if I can do this kind of quick, is to switch what I'm sharing. Okay, yeah, I think this is gonna work. It's cool. Yeah, you see that? See the development and shaping of the brain? You'll see here, I want you to kind of get a grasp on this a little bit here. The making of a human brain from the tip of that neural plate folds over, and they call it the neural tube, from a tip that is 3 millimeters long, a marvel of biological engineering, to arrive at the 100 billion neurons that will be present in a newborn. The brain must grow at a rate of 250,000 nerve cells per minute. 250,000 nerve cells per minute. Now, if you remember from your bio class, the whole mitosis thing, you have two cells and you got the nucleus, kind of actually looks like that. The nucleus kind of spreads apart, and then there's two cells. That has to happen 250,000 times a minute in utero from day one. It varies. Sometimes it's faster. Sometimes it's 1 million a minute. But that on average, 250,000 times per minute for 9 months. That is a lot of neurons. And then as we develop, we end up, and look just a little bit below there, you can see on this page, the brain has 100 trillion connections between neurons, okay? So 1 trillion is really hard. I love numbers, and I think when we talk about big numbers like this, we kind of have to put it into a perspective of how we would want to know this. Now, just to throw some things out there, there are in the U.S. debt right now is trillions of dollars. There's a company, Apple just went by a trillion. There's like $2 trillion is what they're worth. This is lots and lots of money. But we can't really get our head wrapped around, can't get our head wrapped around a million, let alone a billion and a trillion. So I'm going to give you a little analogy. I looked this up on the web. If we were going to count a $1 bill to 100 trillion, okay, and we counted a $1 bill every second, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to get to 100 trillion. Here's the math. It would take you 3,107,000 years to do that. That's a lot of counting. That's like way more than the teller at the bank, right? That's so 3 million years to count that. And that is in everybody. The most unintelligent person you know had a trillion connections. So this is an amazing, amazing, when we talk about the brain being the most complicated, the most amazing thing in the known universe, this is no understatement. Every scientist in the world will give that designation to the human brain. It is beyond complexity. And here we are trying to figure out how it works. How courageous of us to do that. So I want to talk a little bit about the processes that happen. I don't have to share a screen for that, but the processes that are happening in this thing. And during the development of the brain, there are processes that are covered in your book, and they're covered in the course book. And the first one is neuron proliferation, which we just talked about, 250,000 per minute. So proliferating, they're just creating more and more neurons. The next process is neuron migration. And what that means is if you look at the top of the what is now the neural tube, and we're having the brain develop, we know that at the epicenter where all those stem cells are, they're just, knocking a little factory of neurons, and they're just knocking these things out. But they can't stay there. They need to move. They actually need to go to the places that are eventually going to make up the brain. So if you think from that place, if you think about it, I'm going to draw this in the air. This could be like who was that guy that drew the cow there? Anyway, with light. I'm going to do that. Here's the brain. There's the little brain. Like that. And over here, you have the occipital lobe. And over here, the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe and stuff in 3D space. But you really can't, there's nothing there. There's just fluid or anything like that. But all the neurons are being developed right there in the middle. Now, what they do is they start to migrate. If the destiny of a particular neuron is to become a visual processing neuron somewhere in the occipital cortex, it needs to get over there. It needs to move over there with the developing structure of the brain. And that's kind of how the brain expands and fills up the cavity, which will become the cranium. And so it starts to move, and it's not just that they're getting pushed aside. The neuron itself has structures that grab onto what we call glial fibers and actually crawls along those glial fibers, getting to the point in the brain's cavity where there's a signal processing that says, okay, stop. That you're where you need to be now. It's like its career, it takes off, going into the wild world, and then something comes along and say, you found your dream job. You're now an occipital lobe neuron. And so I have a video. Want to see a neuron crawling? It's actually kind of cool. So right here, this is a time lapse. They don't crawl very fast. There's no neuron Olympics or anything like that. This is not racing for the ticket, But this is a video. Moving along. And you can see sometimes, like you can see, this is 3D, it's very close. And sometimes you can see a little flaring of those fibers that are reaching out, and it's moving along, actually moving along the glial fiber to find its rightful place. We still don't understand this. We still don't, and the kind of the story that I tell in my developmental psych class, so some of you have taken that, is that, say for example, in neuron migration, sometimes we discover those things because things go wrong. And so let me give you a couple examples about when things go wrong in neuron migration and what happens. And probably one of the most concerning results of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan that ended World War II was the immense amount of radiation, and in an area that size, hundreds of thousands of people were radiated, including pregnant women who, interestingly enough, if the body is irradiated with radiation, such as an X-ray or a nuclear bomb going off nearby, the body actually channels that radiation to the infant. The mom is less likely to get sick from it, and for some reason it's the baby that gets most of the radiation and absorbs that. Now what we saw, not we, but what happened is children were born and they had particular facial features. Their eyes were a little bit more wide apart, their lips were more thin, and they had mental retardation. And when they died, either naturally or because of further disease associated with the area, and they examined their brains, what they saw was a fairly, the outer cortex, which has all kinds of gyrus, those kind of fissures in there. It looks kind of like your intestines a little bit, if you want to picture that. It's kind of all kind of, and that increases the cortex itself is actually really thin. It's only a few millimeters thick, but it increases the surface area of the brain. So you can actually, the surface area of a brain, if you spread it out in a sheet, could cover a really large table full of billions of neurons. And so that lack of fissures, the lack of fissures meant that there was less surface area, less neurons, less connections, and thus mental retardation. Now, what was fascinating about this at the time was that this was the same features that we would recognize with FAS, which is fetal alcohol syndrome, which also results in the same facial features in the same brain tissue. Now, the difference between fetal alcohol syndrome, which means mom was drinking and, it affected the child and produced these facial features and mental retardation. And then you had radiation that did the same thing. Both mechanisms, alcohol and radiation, affected neuron migration. It was specifically to that. And what it was, the interesting thing was it affected it in different ways. Fetal alcohol syndrome comes about because as the neurons are climbing along their path to success, alcohol enters the system, very small molecule, goes right through the blood barrier. Your kids get drunk. That alcohol is spread out all over their body, and it actually stops the neuron from migrating too early. It's it's the 35-year-old guy still living at home that didn't launch. He's just, he's stuck at home. So here's this neuron, it's stuck. It's not where it's going to go. It's a visual neuron stuck in another part of the cortex. Identity issues, all that stuff. and you have a fairly, the same sort of result of just kind of confused tissue all over the outside of the brain. In radiation, what happens, oh, somebody needs to put their mute on. In radiation, what happens is the mechanism that stops the neuron where it's supposed to be fails, and the neuron just continues, and you get, essentially, it is very different when you look at the microscopic level about neurons that got stopped early because of fetal alcohol syndrome and neurons that didn't stop at all and just kept right on going. They went right past the dream job and ended up, you know, working a dead end job, teaching psychology. No, I'm kidding. So we see this neuron migration and how important it is in terms of the way in which the brain structure is created. And this kind of, to me, when I was exposed to this for the first time, this completely blew my mind that neurons actually climbed along. I hope your mind is sufficiently blown as well. Now, another thing that happens at that same time is differentiation, neuron differentiation. When we, and you'll see it in the book, when we draw a picture of a neuron, we have the cell body, and then there's some sort of like large axons coming from it, and then there's large dendrites. I mean, then there's a long axon, and then at the end, there's another kind of branchy place, the dendrites at the other end. There is hardly a neuron that actually looks like that. That's actually a very, very unique structure of a neuron. That is most typically what a motor neuron would look like, because they have really long axons, so that my brain can tell my toe what to do. You know, let's get some long axons in there. All the neurons are different. They look different. Neurons that sense temperature change or pressure change or softness on your skin, those different neurons, and they are different, the ones that detect heat and the ones that detect pain and the ones that detect pressure and the ones that detect softness and whatnot. They're all different, and they are shaped different. They're shaped to do their job. The neurons in the brain are shaped different. The neurons that are in our occipital lobe are different than the ones that are in our frontal lobe. They look different, and they branch out different. And that differentiation, again, as the neuron is climbing, that video of the neuron that's climbing along, it's not really differentiated yet. It's just like kind of a little blob of neuron wannabe. And as it getting closer and closer to, this is theory, to the chemical composition of the area of the brain that is going to help that neuron transform itself. Right now it's sort of stem cell-y, meaning it can become any kind of cell. As it gets into the area that's more occipital or more parietal or more temporal or more frontal, it starts to change. Or on our skin, our peripheral nervous system as well. You know, it changes into the kind of neuron that needs to be there. This is a mystery to us. As advanced as our understanding of the nervous system, we still don't get how that happens. We don't. Every nerve cell, all those 250,000 nerve cells coming out of the nerve factory at the beginning, all have the potential to be any kind of nerve. And yet we don't understand how they sort of differentiate into the specific function that they have. And when we start seeing, this class freaks me out, because when we start looking, like, we're going to look at the visual system, and we're going to see that on the occipital lobe, the actual field of vision is mapped geographically on the back of the brain, meaning things that are on your left are actually proportionally being processed in the back of your brain on the right side, like a certain distance kind of in parallel to what we're seeing. It's mapped out along that thing. And this happened before you had eyes. That's a little freaky right there. So your brain is developing the neurons to your eyes. Now, we always think of, we know that brain development is an environmental genetic sort of thing. So one of the great mysteries of, let's say, the visual system is that the brain prepares itself to be a visual system before there's an environment telling it to be a visual system. It just goes to that part of the brain. The neurons from the eyes are still growing back to the brain but the brain is sitting there and it's already mapped out the eye by the time. So when all those connections come in, we get vision. That's just so cool. Okay, another process that's happening, and this relates to your lab, and it'll maybe put some clarity on why I want you to do someone under age 3. And that is the process of myelination. In addition to all of the neuron proliferation, neuron migration, and neuron differentiation, there's a process that happens once neurons are in place called myelination. And myelination is the growth of a kind of a fatty substance on the outside of the neuron that serves to protect the neuron, serves as a connection to the glial support cells within the nervous system that nourish and support and keep the neuron in place. Actually, it kind of holds in the substrate of the brain, it's kind of holding the neuron where it's supposed to be. But it also does something very important in terms of the neuron transmission, which is what we talked about last week. And this is sort of a repeat, that having myelin on the neuron increases the electrical conductivity, or the speed, the efficiency of the neuron's transmission. This leads to a faster nervous system, and then thus the ability for highly coordinated movement, like moving. And imagine a small child and how cool it is when they're finally able to grasp onto a Cheerio, and we're like, they got fine motor development, that's awesome. Compare that to a classical guitar player. Like, wow, there's like a world of difference between that. And that world of difference, aside from a lot of practice and calluses on your fingers, is myelination. There's no way the nervous system is fast enough in a small child for that kind of dexterity. So that's that's happening at the same time. Couple other things that are happening, synaptogenesis. And that's kind of it's a binary word. So you have synapse, genesis, the birth of synapses. So these are you're going from 1 billion cells to 100 trillion connections. So it's the reaching out, it's the branching out. So if you actually think about, I'll use this analogy. We're about to go into the season here where we are losing the leaves on the trees, right? So when you look at a forest right now, it looks dense, and that would be a highly branched out nervous system. Leaves touching leaves, and all that stuff. They're not worried about COVID transmission, so they're touching each other all the time. And so you got that happening. And then as the leaves start to go, obviously not the same process here, but as the leaves start to go, look, it looks thinner. You can see through now, and there's not as many connections. Now put that in reverse. That we start off with kind of like the bare trees, and then the leaves and little twigs start to come out and they start connecting until in the end we get this very, very complex web of interconnections within our brain. And then we use it or lose it, right? As we are developing, and I'm going to go back to that concept that I put in there before about the interaction between the environment and the developing brain. Let's say there's, and I'm going to be facetious about this, but let's say there's a part of my brain that is geared toward learning Chinese. It's just ready to go. That's a very different language. It operates on a very different set of phonemes. It operates on a very different set of physical structures and what language actually means as it gets coded into the brain. And every brain born on Earth has the capability of learning to speak Chinese. Lo and behold, I was born in Montreal and the availability of Chinese was very low, and I ended up not learning Chinese. that part of my brain that was kind of geared up for that, no longer needed. So there's a process called synaptic pruning. And it's just like a tree, right? We're going to prune the tree. If anybody here grows apple trees, or you grow any fruit trees, or any of your got bushes outside or whatever, you prune them and they become more efficient, more thick and dense. There's a really, that I can't figure. I actually ended up cutting down all my trees because I don't know how to do that. All the bushes. So I don't know how to trim them to make them look good. So they were ugly. So anyway, you trim, or the parts of our brain that we're not using all the time get trimmed off, and those parts of it die, and the well-trodden paths through our brain become what we refer to as habits, or when we've learned something really well. Let's say the kind of look at this in all the different ways. To take a skill like riding a bike. That's one of those things they say you never forget once you've learned how to ride a bike, right? Well, the kind of neurological basis to that is the first time you were trying to learn a bike, you were probably on a three-wheeler, a big wheel or something like that, because you didn't have the ability to hold your body up and react really suddenly to the shifts of a bike going like this. So you're on the wheels, and the first time you got on there, I have a granddaughter. She can't push the damn pedal. You take hand over hand doing this kind of thing. And they're like, keep going. And I stop. And she's like, doesn't do anything more. And so she doesn't have enough. Think about the complexity of that. I ride bike, and there's a complexity about relaxing and pushing and relaxing and pushing. So once you get that going, and you have some myelination happening, it's all going on, and you're doing that, pretty soon that mechanism, which is repetitive, think about when you're riding a bike now, and think about when you first learned to ride a bike, and then that's all you did, right? You just got on your bike and you were gone all day. And then how many times did you pedal? It's in the millions of times that you probably pedaled the bike. So that neuron pathway, which is going push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, push, like that. That's like this big road in the woods now. That's just like 2 tire tracks on your way to the woodlot. It's just, it's very, very well worn. So even if you don't, really, if on the back 40 of your property, if you have that, you have a trail that goes out and you're going out there kind of thing, you could kind of like not go for a couple years, and then you could go out and it's still there. Might be growing up a little bit, you might have to, the first time you get back on the bike, you might have a little trouble, just like the first time you get on that trail. You might have to mow the lawn. There might be a branch across, kind of thing. You have to relearn that. But the path is still there. And those pathways, that's a result. Kind of think of that as pruning. Pruning makes those solid pathways that give us the solid memories, particularly in this case, procedural memories that are so concretely built into our brains. So, and another word for that the book uses is, I'm going to get right, neural Darwinism. Now, by Darwinism, what they mean is we're not really talking about the term evolution, which is actually not what Darwin was really talking about. What he talked about was the process of natural selection. Natural selection means if there's something in the environment that is eliciting a particular kind of development, that's what's going to develop. If that thing is not there, then it's not going to develop. So those of you who think about working with, or you have, or of course when you were a child, when we're young, there's a real important reason why, to an extent, we enrich the environment of a small child. We don't take children and put them into an empty room painted gray. That's not what we do. We almost instinctively put stuff in there. We put things of different textures. We put things of different size. We put things that make sounds. We put things that have mirrors on them. We put things that they can manipulate, put things that they can't, they can just lay on them or something like that. And we let them explore, because we're playing Darwinism. We're saying the environment is going to select all of these skills, the ability to manipulate objects, identify different textures, hear different sounds, see different visual things. We want to enrich all of that and ensure that the environment supports the development of those particular characteristics. When we look at an environment that is deprived, we see the absence of those things. And so that's kind of a neurological definition of abuse. If you want to think about it that way, it's kind of a weird way to say it, but the idea that not giving those kind of things. Now, there's such thing as overwhelmed. There's certainly, you can have too many things. There's a neighbor child that lives in my right across the street from me who, you want to try out a toy, want to have a kid try out a toy, just go there, because it's there. They have it all. They have every toy imaginable. In their backyard, you cannot at times see the grass because it's covered with toys. And to me that, and then, there's some other behavioral issues and stuff like that. And I won't say it's all because she has too many toys, but certainly there's kind of can only go so far with all that stuff. Okay. Now, one story I will tell about that, a real life story of a person who, very interesting story. If you ever heard of it's not anywhere in the course book, but it kind of came to me when I was reviewing the material, was the story of the girl named Jeannie. Has anybody ever heard of that? Jeannie, she was raised in isolation. Now, we're not talking about language development, and maybe we'll take some time to I'll put the link out there for you to look at this, because it's a great documentary on it. It's a great study, not only in social deprivation of a child and language development, which is really the focus point of that particular documentary, but it kind of focuses on how screwed up psychologists can get. It's a little dicey on the people that were working with her were a little off. They were a lot off. And anyway, it was found in California, this a young girl, she was, I think she was 7 years old when they discovered her, had spent the first 7 years of her life tied to a potty chair in a room and was fed through a slot underneath the door. And so for the first 7 years of her life, her parents had her in the upstairs room, and that's how they dealt with her. So she was the as far as linguists and human development are concerned, she represented, and this is where it got weird, the forbidden experiment. What would happen if we raised a kid without any human contact? What would happen if we deprived them of all that stuff? Up until this date, that was only a thought experiment, speculating. And then we get this horrible situation that gives the psychologists of the day an opportunity to study that. The studying of it ended up at Jeannie's detriment, but nonetheless, we discovered that she was very animal-like in many ways. She would speak in grunts and gestures. She was emotionally volatile. She also had a high, very, very high tolerance for pain and a very high tolerance for cold. Like the first time she experienced snow, she tore off all the clothes, which she did all the time. She tore off all the clothes and went rolling in it and was just having fun. Just no experience, just like a dog would. A dog goes out there and rolls in the snow. And the focus of the study about Jeannie was the lack of language, and can we see whether or not she could learn to read or not, learn to talk. And so, and we'll talk about that critical period of when language comes to us. Our brains are really geared to learning language, and it's more difficult later on and stuff. And I'll talk about some different thoughts about that, but they certainly thought this was an opportunity. two factors. First, we don't know whether Jeannie was, whether there was something wrong with Jeannie when she was born. We know there's something wrong with her now. We know that she has delays, massive delays, but we don't know if she was originally delayed. So the potential, we don't know. And they tried to teach her language and she got some, but to this day, I believe she has not been able to converse in any way. So that it's used as evidence that there is a critical period for learning language, but it might be that she was already born without the ability to have language. Now, the one observation I made, and I've never really followed up on it because I'm a little lazy sometimes, but when she was learning how to talk, it's in the video, maybe we'll point it out when we get there. When she was learning how to talk, she would say things like store, go to I. And the linguist, who's the real off individual, when we watch this movie, don't you want to watch this movie now? It's going to be really good. When the person who was she actually kidnapped her. It's really bad. It's really bad. Anyway, she said she's not getting syntax. She's not going to say, I go to the store. I have the subject, the verb, transitive into the noun, kind of thing like that. I go to store. I go to that. The verb follows the object. The interesting thing that I was in class one time showing this in my developmental psych class, and it just occurred to me that that's actually how deaf language is. Deaf language reverses those two. There's several other languages that do that, but I happen to know sign language. So I was like, wait a minute, that's exactly how you would sign that. So I wonder if Jeannie's language capability may have been disrupted congenitally, certainly disrupted because of her upbringing, but was actually geared more toward whatever constructs sign language, and that the linguist never caught on that. That was the point at which she threw up her arms and she said, "There's nothing more to do. She just does not have this capability to learn syntax. She'll never talk normally." Kind of thing. And I wonder now, the end game is that she was placed in state custody. Her name was changed and she was moved away from all these crazy people. So Jeannie has had, I believe she was very young in the 70s. So she's still, unless something has happened to her, she's still around. I promise we'll take a look at that when we look at language development. Language systems, and we'll throw that in there because that's kind of a cool thing in there. Now, the other thing that I've included, switching gears here a little bit, the other thing that I've included in the course book is a little bit on the unique qualities of people who are either born with disabilities or born that have certain gifts. So individuals who are born blind or deaf, or individuals who are born who are great artists or musicians. And I'm having you do a little bit of looking into that for one of the assignments, or the discussion is to have you do a little bit of research on music itself, music and the brain and what that is. But I want to take some time in class here to watch the movie that I included, just a short 6-minute movie. And I'm going to bring that up here. And we'll watch a little movie about musicians and the brain. And the audio starts right away. So I'm going to time this right here. And raise your hand if you can't hear it.
Do we know yet why this exists? Do we have an understanding of what's going on inside the brain case?
So we actually do not have brain scans of child prodigies before they started practicing. So we don't know if they were born with different brains. Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of studies of the brains of musicians.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Not.
Brains of musicians are different from the brains of non-musicians. There are about 5 different areas where the brains of musicians are larger structurally. But we don't know if they were born that way or if that's kind of a use-dependent growth. You know, there's a lot of evidence for use-dependent growth. If people who play the piano use your right hand more than your left hand, and the finger areas of the brain that control the right hand actually are larger than the finger areas of the brain that control the left hand.
So this is brain plasticity?
It's brain plasticity, right?
Okay.
So we know that Einstein's brain was atypical. At least there's a controversy about it, but some people claim his brain was looked at after death.
Okay.
And there was certain areas in the spatial area which were atypical, larger. It was a deeper, I don't want to get into the technicalities because I don't remember the exact technicalities. His brain was different in the visual spatial area, but of course we don't know if he was born that way or whether he used his brain so much to think visually spatially that it grew.
Okay, but it's clear that both things can happen. It's clear that people can be born with different brain capabilities that even relate to physical structures.
Absolutely.
And it's also clear that those physical structures can evolve
grow.
over time.
Right.
Do we know anything about when in life these changes are perhaps most likely to happen or most easily fosterable?
Probably in childhood, because the brain, it used to, but it's now been shown that adults can show brain plasticity too. There was a famous juggling study. Have you heard of this study?
No.
It was published in Nature.
Okay.
They took adults who didn't know how to juggle, and they taught them how to juggle. They scanned their brains. They looked at the structure of the brain. There are two kinds of brain scans. There's functional and structural.
That's the fMRI.
fMRI, functional, looks at the brain activation during certain kinds of tasks. Structural looks at actually the shape of the brain.
Okay.
When it's not doing a particular task. It's just the shape of the brain, the anatomy of the brain. So the jugglers were scanned pre and post learning to juggle. And visual spatial areas of their brain grew larger after having learned to juggle. Brain plasticity.
Right.
Then they had them stop juggling, and they measured them again a few months later. Went right back down to where it was before.
And
so, use it or lose it.
Right, exactly. And how old were these subjects?
They were adults.
Okay.
I don't know how old.
Right. Which makes perfect sense.
I don't know if they were aging. I don't know whether how much brain plasticity you would have if you're 80.
Okay. But and by that you mean we really don't know?
We really don't know.
Okay. So it could as well be.
It could be.
Right. Because it seems to be a lot of studies in gerontology about maintaining brain function as you get older, and certain kinds of activities that you would do.
Right. Although I have to say those are really not based on brain scans. They make a lot of sense. Like if you play bridge, you keep your brain alive.
Right.
Nobody has actually shown that if you play bridge, your brain shrinks less.
Got it. So that's work waiting to be done.
Yes.
Right. And it would seem to be fairly easily doable.
Right.
Right.
Right. There are probably a lot of old people that would like to have their brain scanned to prove that their bridge is keeping them healthy.
I think that's really fascinating. I think all this mechanical meets the cognitive stuff is all really fascinating. And I think because playing musical instruments is so much a mechanical endeavor at some level, that we're always wondering, have I missed my critical window of being able to do a thing? And I think the old dog new trick thing is a thing that a lot of players think about. I think about it now as I get older, and I'm trying to still learn to do a lot of these things.
I think there is a lot of anecdotal evidence that physical skills are best learned in childhood. So bike riding,
swimming, throwing the ball,
playing an instrument, sports, dancing, figure skating.
Right. And we're referring to the speed and the ease of which the thing is learned.
The speed and the ease of which the thing is learned, and the level to which you can.
I see.
You can aspire.
And how? So there's another. That's a good comment. Sometimes you see very kind of oracular pronouncements like, "Oh, well, because you never did a thing before the age of X, you'll never be able to do."
Right.
And then what follows is some very vague statement of skill, like the elite level of that thing.
Yeah.
And so I never like to think that way, of course, because I want to learn everything. But then I have to say, well, how do you define elite level? Why can't I do that? So
there are probably millions of exceptions. One area where it's probably most true is in the area of learning a second language.
Okay.
But it's not a hard and fast rule. But it turns out that the older you get, the harder it is to learn a second language. Even if you are immersed in the culture rather than just learning it in school, you just learn it more slowly.
And does learning a second language earlier in life keep that window open longer for other languages later on?
But it depends. It would depend on whether the language is related to the language that you've already that you've already, the second language that you've already
And
learned.
this is a thing that seems testable, right? Like that kind of thing is. seems like a
Absolutely.
thing that
So
could-
if you could test kids that are brought up in bilingual families and compare them to kids who are brought up in monolingual families and look at how easy it is for both groups of kids to learn some other language
Right.
in adulthood.
Got it. And
That's a really interesting question. Musician.
All right. Hey, some of you could maybe do that for your final project in your psychology degree. That'd be great. Any thoughts about that? About brain plasticity here?
Well, what were they talking about? Like with the bridge.
Or if you can try and keep your computer steady, and so I can see you.
What were they talking about? Like with the bridge.
The bridge?
Yeah, they were talking about. That's the only thing I didn't understand what they were talking about.
I didn't really either. Yeah, it was something about a bridge when you're older.
Yeah.
A bridge when you get older?
Yeah, in the brain. They were talking about, I don't know if it was like a reference to something, but they were talking about some kind of bridge in the brain when you get older.
Yeah. I just didn't know what they were. Yeah, I didn't know what they were really referring to, but.
In the video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I missed that. Ooh.
Well, never mind.
I was texting. No,
Oh,
no,
good.
I really wasn't. I wasn't doing that. I think as we age, you know, the kind of perspective I have on that in terms of aging and as we're learning new skills is for, you know, certainly after the physical peak of somebody, because there's a different times which you meet our physical peak, that moving physically becomes different and our nervous system slows. Just like it was getting faster, it starts to slow. Some of that pruning gets a little out of control. We might have some injuries that don't necessarily fix themselves, you know, kind of things. And those kind of things can slow us down. So the chances of me becoming an NBA star are really low, and to learn new physical skills and stuff like that. So that was a kind of a piece on there. I've had, now in terms of the bridge, there might be, the way I've learned about bridges in terms of cognitive development, kind of not quite as related to the biology, in cognitive development. And that video was sort of a mix of cognitive psych and biopsych, is that bridges are when there's similarity between things. And like when she talked about a person, let's say a person has been raised speaking French and tries to learn Spanish. French and Spanish linguistically come from the same root Romantic languages. And so there's lots of connections between those, and we're more easily able to bridge those and make cognitive connections between the meanings of words and kind of almost infer and make that leap into the next skill set. A person who's learned how to, let's say, play baseball and they have eye-hand coordination may be better at tennis because those skills have been bridged. They're similar. They have to learn different things about them, but so that's how I've seen the word bridge. And I apologize that I missed that word. I didn't even pick it up in the context that it was. Do you remember the context? That Ashley, if you could, do you remember the context of it that it was in?
I think, yeah, what Jordan was saying, I think that probably just answered it, because she was talking about language, and then like if somebody was trying to learn a new language when they were older,
yep,
like depending on like Spanish and French, linguistically they're in the same kind of family.
Yep.
It would probably be easier as opposed to like another language that you weren't necessarily.
Yeah, like Russian or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's probably what it
Yeah,
was.
so I think maybe that's what she was talking about. I missed the word, but I think maybe we're referring to that same thing, that there's more connection. So there's essentially more bridges.
Yeah, that makes
One
sense.
side of the shore and the other. Does that make sense, Jordan?
Yep, that makes
Yep.
more sense.
And I have two stories about language, though, that I want to say. The first is a forbidden experiment that I think would be interesting to see if this would work. Now, this is just me, and I'm not a linguist, but I'm imaginative. So I imagine an experiment. When we think about the development of human language, and we think about, we kind of get it around, we're born, and then let's say at around age 2.5, 3 years old. Let's say 3. And a 3-year-old usually can communicate pretty well. They can get, they know everybody's names. They know the names. They have something like 10,000 words. They have, there's all kinds of, they're adept at moving around. If you know any 3-year-olds, they can say the darndest things, right? And they have all this stuff going on. Now, in the video, she talked about immersion. And I'm wondering if we took, like when you're doing an immersion, you're basically, let's say in Canada, if you're in the public school system, you have the choice to either take your classes in English or engage in what they call French immersion, which you're taking French classes, but you're also taking your math class being taught in French. So they're kind of dumping you into the language and forcing you. I mean, imagine struggling with something like, I don't mean to pick on math, but you're struggling with math and you don't even know what they're saying, so it's a really high stressful sort of thing. But purposefully people learn the language that way. Now, what I want you to picture, however, that even though that is challenging for adults, what if we actually mimicked the first 3 years of life? If we took a person who's an adult, and I know it's going to sound weird, but we placed them in a dependent situation equivalent to an infant. They can't change, they can't walk, they can't do anything, and surround them 24/7 by an individual who's constantly going, apple, 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 doing that kind of like totally and every time you, let's say I was in a Russian family, every time I was even close to saying any Russian word, they're on the phone calling their parents saying, Mark said a word, and getting all excited about that. Could I learn the language in 3 years under those circumstances? Now, it's not an experiment that probably people are willing to do, but if you're totally dependent, you can sit there, point all you want, and the people are just going to go, nope, and you're starving. Imagine the motivation to learn how to say peanut butter in Russian, so you can get that. So I don't know if under those extreme circumstances, whether or not it would click open the language acquisition device, which we'll talk about much later, that aspect of our brain that learns language, whether we kick it in like that. What do you think? I saw some heads nodding, maybe any volunteers to go to Russia?
I say we try it.
What's that?
I say we try it.
Field trip. We're going to go. The other story I have was in graduate school. There was a lady that I knew who was a fellow student of mine down at University of Southern Maine. And she had an experience. She's obviously an adult, and she was with her boyfriend, and they're in a bank. And there was a Japanese woman in front of them, and she was having trouble communicating because she knew no English, and she's in a, Freeport and at a bank and trying to get and the person I knew and her boyfriend were in a hurry. So there's this kind of like, hope this kind of goes. It's a small bank, only one teller and stuff like this. So the pressure's mounting and stuff like this. And so the woman, the friend that I had, went forward and started translating for the lady in Japanese and talking to her back, and kind of like helped her with the exchange. Got tired of waiting. She had no idea she knew Japanese until that day. She had no idea. She was under pressure. She just started doing it, and she's just talking back and forth, and she got it all ready. And the boyfriend's like, "When the hell did you learn Japanese?" And she goes, "Did I just speak Japanese?" And everybody's freaking out. She was an alien. No, she wasn't. She was the story goes, this really freaked her out. It was almost like one of those, what's the show there? The secret agent that, almost drowned. What's that? Anyway, wakes up and he has all these karate abilities, doesn't know where they came from. She was freaked out by this, and she called her parents, and what they finally found out is that when she was 3 years old, 3 to 5, she had a nanny, and the nanny was a Japanese woman who was fluent in both English and Japanese. And her and her sister, who a younger sister, that was their nanny, and they would talk English while mom and dad were there. But as soon as mom and dad left, the nanny switched to Japanese and only spoke to them in Japanese. She didn't have any very clear recall of this, but essentially during that, what we would call the critical period, enough Japanese got in there that it surfaced right under those. So who knows? Maybe you have a latent talent that, given pressure, you'll just take out that flute and just, play some Mozart for us or something like that. You'll have never remembered where you got it from. So isn't the brain amazing? It hit a whole language from her, and as an adult came out under that pressure and all that. So, okay. So what we're kind of ending with here is the notion of the development of the brain, and ultimately the name of our video today, the name of our Zoom session, I called it Plastic Brain. And the term plastic means something that can return to its original shape. So in the invention of plastic, the coolest thing about plastic was that you could bend it and it would snap back to this was amazing when plastic came out, just like nothing does that. Glass breaks, metal bends, wood cracks, and then we came up with plastic, and it moves around and it returns to its original shape. And the brain has an incredible ability, a plasticity, meaning it can adapt to new situations. It can grow new neurons, as you saw in that example, the jugglers who in that spatial area, it actually physically grew. You can imagine that's, the trees just started blossoming. They just started shooting out all kinds of little twigs and leaves and all that stuff for learning this new skill. And perhaps the growth would have remained permanent had they, taken up juggling as a hobby. And it just became just easier to do that. And I'll just share with you that my COVID plan was to subject myself to guitar lessons. I've been playing guitar for 30 years, poorly. Then the discipline of I signed up for online lessons, and every day there's something for me to do, and just doing that. And there's got to be, I haven't done a brain scan. I don't have one to do that. And but I think it'd be interesting to see if there's some spatial and maybe some auditory areas in my brain that are changing, because if I try to learn a song now, I find it immensely more easy than I did before. My hands shape the chords more easily, even though I've been playing for all this time. I'm a bass player, so this is not my traditional instrument. So that ability to adapt, that ability to take in new things, even when you're 55 years old, and old dogs, new tricks. And so that's kind of what we're talking about in today's chapter, is that plasticity. So what we're left, the assignments for this week, the assessments that are at the end of chapter 5 here, they include, there's a discussion on music and the brain. So I want you to do some looking around and just talk about music, or share your own thing. People that you know who might be really talented in something. They're really good at photography, or they're good artists, or they draw well, or they're good at singing or music and that, musical instruments or anything like that, and kind of have a little bit of a discussion about your own experiences with individuals who might have parts of their brain that are larger than average. In the assignment, I'm going to have you look at deafness and the adaptations within the brain. I'm going to tell you a story about that. Deaf adaptations, and write that up. That's a kind of a little mini research paper on the brain adaptations for deaf individuals. And then in the quiz has to do with what happens to the brain when it's injured. And I really want you, and I'm not going to use the time here. I think it's more of that. I'm not sure if the video will come through, but the TED Talk right at the beginning of the chapter in the attention getting has to do with the neurologist who actually went through a stroke. And I've read her book called A Stroke of Insight. And it is her ability to actually recollect the process of her going through a stroke. And then she goes into some of the neurology as to how the brain recovers and rebuilds itself, rewires, and there's some terminology that are included in the quiz. So that's some stuff to look at right there. But I'll leave you with another amazing story. And that was when I was working I worked for a company called Maine Independent Living Services, which was a cross-disability independent living center. So we dealt with all the disabilities. Mental health disabilities are kind of my specialty, but we dealt with people who were deaf, blind, mobility, whatever, and provided independent living services for them, maximizing the ability for them to function outside of an institution. And there was a person on our board, everybody that worked there and everybody on the board had to have a disability. It's one of the it's kind of reverse illegal, but anyway, you had to have some sort of disability. I was partially deaf. And so you had to have a disability to be on the board. And there was an individual there, very, very smart lady. No, she was blind, completely blind, not just low vision, just no retinas kind of thing. And the book talks a little bit about how the unused part of the brain called the occipital lobe, the poor occipital lobe, all those neurons that climbed those glial fibers, went over there with the ambition to become, visual processing, are all let down by the fact that this lady's neurons didn't grow from the eyes. There was no connection to the eyes. Her eyes were not functioning. So they adapted. And in truth, what we start to see in terms of functional MRI, which kind of like looks at the brain activity by measuring the blood flow in particular areas of the brain, which is very dynamic. When a part of the brain starts to work, it sends blood over there with another part, and this is very fast. And so people who are blind, when they're touching things, their occipital lobe lights up. And not just the sensation from your fingers usually goes to the parietal lobe, which is like the side of the head, kind of like where a headband would go over the top of your head, where like headphones would go. But their occipital lobe would light up, and almost kind of like creating visual images of what they're feeling. And the story, which kind of freaked me out. So I'm sitting in the board, and this lady comes in, and I knew her, so we're talking, and she has a she had a little typewriter. It was tiny. It looked like just a machine. And what it had a roll. Almost looked like just like a thin receipt, like a really little, only about that thick, but like a big receipt roll. And it's going, and she would type, and these things would punch holes in it. She could turn it upside down, and it was Braille, like a Braille type. So she's doing that, and the way this machine worked is it would go for about that long, and then there was like a little, it was perforated. So that was kind of like the thing. And so she's taking notes, and she'd get to the end of one of those, she'd take it up, she would snap it off, peel the backing off of it, and it was adhesive on the back, and she'd put it into a notebook. And she could put them like that. So that's how she took notes. Oh, that was kind of cool. I'd never seen that before. And so here's her book, right? So here's her book, and it has these strips of paper with these bumps on it. And so this is freaky. So we're talking about a meeting that we had like last year, kind of like, and she said, I think I have the notes on that. And she's taking her book, and she's going, I don't know if I can demonstrate this. She has her book like this. She's not holding it like this, but she's just going like this, turning a page, just going on the book like that. And I'm looking at her, I'm like, I think her name was Sue. I said, Sue, what are you doing? She says, I'm scanning. She just swipe her hand on these little dots of these pieces of paper, and meaning, like as if we would look for a book and we're looking for a particular word and we're scanning, she scanned with her hand. And she's just going along, and she's like, okay, all right, okay, here's what we said. And she was able to find it. Boom. And I was like, oh my God, the sensitivity of her hand. I mean, we're not only talking about our fingertips are incredibly sensitive, and that's why people read Braille with their fingertips. Her adaptation of not only her brain, but also the neurons in her hand, her entire hand became a scanning device that she would be able to pick up just little snippets of letters that just went through, and she was looking for familiar orientation of these dots in her mind to find a note that was a year old. And I would venture to guess that because of the organization of her material and her ability to scan, that she was the first one to find those notes. Everybody was looking in theirs, and she went right to it and found right where it was, and then read out what we had decided.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. And this is not an abnormal person. This is not an Einstein. This is you and me, if we had those needs to develop that. And it's just, that's why I study psychology. I tell you, that stuff just completely is amazing. And so, glad you enjoyed that story. So, any questions in terms of what we're doing? Just a quick review. There's a discussion about music and art. There's a quiz that kind of has to relate to the repair mechanisms after brain damage. And then there's an assignment where you're going to look at how does the brain of a deaf person adapt. And we're really looking for the neurology of this. This is biopsych. It's not just behavioral adaptations, but that, that they say, if you can't hear, does your vision get better? That kind of, is there some evidence of that? And then there's the lab, the lab that some of you might be able to do. But I want to talk about that lab next time. I've created a Dropbox for it, but I would actually, if one or two of you end up doing it, I would actually like to look at the results and to see whether we actually do see a difference in a relatively unmyelinated versus myelinated system, and kind of follow up on that. And that will kind of round up all the stuff that we've talked about today.
So what happens if we can't do that lab, if we don't have?
Yeah, I'm not going to worry about it. It's going to, I put it in there because it's what I thought of today. And but I'm flexible with that particular grade. I think I would like to see it done, but it's not going to count if you don't
Okay.
do it. And if you do it, then we'll negotiate some sort of maybe you can get out of doing a quiz or something like that. You can, you get a high five from me, virtual. And you'll have the fun of working with a small. Anybody think that they might be able to do that? Do they have access to somebody who's
I think I
potentially? Yeah, maybe that'd be cool.
can.
What about you, Meredith? Do you have a like little kids that you work with, or they're not little enough?
Hi. No, they're not little enough. They're elementary school, so I work full-time in an elementary school.
Do it anyway. They would laugh. They would have fun with it. Have them compete.
Okay.
Girls against the boys.
All right, I actually have to go do bus duty. So, all right, bye.
Okay, I'll see you later, Meredith.
Yeah, bye.
All right, so any questions about anything at this point? You all set? Does this work? Is this useful for us to meet? And I mean, you're getting my stuff, you're getting my talking. I didn't really get you to talk very much, but is it?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Don't want to waste your time,
Mark.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions like afterwards. I have a couple questions about the stats class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jordan, want to stay after that for that too? We talk about
Yes,
stats.
please.
Okay. Okay, Ashley, we're all set. We're gonna take a little journey into math here.
Hey.
You can check out.
Okay. Bye.
All right, I'll see you later. I'll see you next week. Okay. Go ahead.
So I know you had emailed me and said that you wanted to spend like this coming Wednesday talking about the chapter 2 that we had missed since we missed our Zoom. So does that not mean like starting Wednesday that we're working on chapter 3 at all, or
That's
do you
right.
still work on that?
That's exactly right. We're going to be starting chapter 2 Wednesday.
Okay, so if we've already done it, then just
Hold on to it.
yeah.
If you've already done
The
chapter
lab,
2,
chapter 2.
yeah. What I'm expecting you to do is to try chapter 2. We were supposed to cover chapter 2.
Yeah.
Last Wednesday.
Gotcha.
And I would have expected you to have done your best effort.
Mhm.
You would have gone over that. That's what we're going to do
Okay.
this coming Tuesday.
So don't worry about 3 yet. Gotcha.
Yeah, don't worry about 3 yet. I'm going to go and I'm going to rewrite the timeline. And you still don't have books yet, right?
Oh. And I'm pretty sure we paid for them too.
I haven't even been able to buy mine yet, so.
I know I was able to add it to my cart and like purchase it, but it just said back ordered.
Yep.
I'll try that then.
Yeah, and but I followed up with the bookstore before the class started, and I said, for one, there's only 2 students. 2, what I did to save money is I bundled the books for this class with the books for next semester for research method. So it all comes, you get 4 books and you get the SPSS software for 1 year. So it kind of like takes care of the whole year. And it's way cheap to do it that way. And so I asked her if there's any way, asked the bookstore manager if there's any way, they said there's only 1 piece that's missing. And I'm like, well, what's the piece that's missing? And can we get the other pieces? And she said, I'll look into that. And that person's I don't know. I'm going to follow up today. I'll follow up today. So, so this class is getting kind of screwed up because of that, because the instructions to do all that Excel stuff are in the textbook.
Yeah.
Like with pictures and everything. It's very cool. It's all meant so that you're using Excel and SPSS and you're doing the same thing twice in each one, so you really get to know both programs. And it's just being this textbook thing is it's affecting 30% of the campus right now is textbookless. And so you're not the only one. So we carry forth. Let's focus just on chapter 2 for this coming Wednesday. That's all we're going to do, and we'll figure this out. I'm in charge of the class, so we're a team here. We'll be fine. We'll be fine.
Sounds good.
Okay, so have a good rest of the week,
You too.
and I will see both of you on Wednesday.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, take care.
You too. Bye.